Let's unpack this conversation a little more with University of Pretoria African Politics and International Relations Professor Christopher Isike. Prof, good to speak to you as always. Let's start with how does the South Africans' legal case against Israel at the International Court of Justice impact global perceptions on the situation in Gaza?
Thank you for having me, Hugo, and good to see you again. Look, the Secretary General was spot on that the world is getting increasingly accustomed to parties to conflicts flouting international law, committing war crimes, and even flouting UN rules and conventions, as well as even the UN Charter itself, and this is the situation. The world, apart from a few countries like South Africa, and this is what South Africa has done, is really commendable. The world has basically turned a blind eye to what has been unfolding in the Middle East for years, let's not be deluded. We have been cornered into thinking that everything that we are seeing today happening in Gaza started on the 7th of October. That is not correct. It started years and years ago when the world turned a blind eye to actually resolving the central question in the Middle East conflict, which is the question of a Palestinian state. We've all kept quiet, turned blind eyes, and empowered, made these belligerent states, the major actors, those who perpetuate this violence, those who perpetuate this inhumanity, to do so because of the fact that we've been quiet for too long. And it is refreshing to hear a United Nations Secretary General actually refusing to budge and calling consistently for, at least in this case, a humanitarian ceasefire.
So there's obviously growing talk of the need for that ceasefire and several other issues. But let's talk about the implications of the ICJ ruling in favor of South Africa. What is likely to happen?
Well, if they hold their ground, the ICJ is supposed to be able to find that indeed Israel has been committing beyond war crimes to genocide in Gaza. The South African case demonstrated a link between intent to do so on the part of the Israeli government, intent to commit genocide, and the actual actions that are taking place on the ground. I mean, the singular example of the Prime Minister talking about telling the soldiers to remember what happened to the Amalekites, and the soldiers, after bombing Gaza, singing that, first of all, there are no uninvolved civilians, and secondly, that the Amalekites will be destroyed. If you are religious and you go to the Bible, you know who the Amalekites are and what was done to them. You will see the relationship between these. So I would expect that the ICJ would find, at least not find South Africa guilty, the Israel guilty of genocide at this point, because that's not what South Africa is really praying for now, but will have cause to grant those provisional measures, to allow a pause in the conflict pending the outcome of the case.
So South Africa is looking for an emergency stop order, and so is the rest of the world. So South Africa's spearheaded this application to ICJ. Now, we've in the last few weeks seen more and more countries speaking out against Israel. Is this likely to enhance or convince the ICJ's decision, or is that independent of what's happening across the globe?
Well, it's supposed to be independent, but they are human beings, and perceptions sometimes, a thin line between perceptions and reality in politics and international politics. Remember, too, we've also seen immediately after the case, in fact, I think a day after, we saw countries like Germany restate a strong support, or come out to give strong support to Israel, stating that Israel has not committed any genocide. And so we've had countries express support for either South Africa or Israel since then. Of course, more countries for the South African cause. And like I said, it's refreshing that a country like South Africa its soft power, is able to punch above its weight and to lead the way in this charge. And it's refreshing to see that more and more countries are coming to their senses and calling this for what it actually is.
Now, what's pretty interesting is the stance by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, in a recent call, President Joe Biden of the United States spoke to his Israeli counterpart, and obviously we know that the United States is an ally of Israel. But the comments that came out from Israel was that Israel must retain security control over all territory west of Jordan, and this is post the war. So for all intents and purposes, it almost seems that the Israelis cannot be turned in their thinking and their position.
Well, first and foremost, and for those who think that South Africa was wasting its time in the International Criminal Court of Justice, you will notice that from when South Africa took this case to the ICJ, there was an engagement. For the first time, you heard the Israeli Prime Minister stating that it was not the intention of Israel to remain in Gaza indefinitely. Before then, that was not what he was saying. And you could see them also argue, when Israel was arguing out its case, that it had started de-escalating its offensive in the Gaza. These are direct consequence of South Africa taking the case forward. And then now coming to the phone call with President Biden, yes, indeed, he had come out to say that. But in private, there are also reports that suggest that he had said that he had not completely foreclosed the idea of a two-state solution, the idea of a Palestinian state. And Hugo, I can tell you today that that is the elephant in the room. That is the one big question that the world needs to answer. That is the final political solution to this crisis. The fact that that has not been on the table in various peace processes is what is fundamentally wrong in that particular crisis. Now, the minute you hear him saying that he has not foreclosed it completely, it gives us hope that indeed there can be some kind of solution. But at the end of the day, the Israelis are not going to win this war militarily. The problem of the Palestinian cause in the Middle East is not going to be resolved militarily. It has to be resolved politically. And a two-state solution, which the United States back, is the only way forward to resolve this. So I think that he may speak on the one hand about what their military intent is, but ultimately the solution will have to be a two-state solution, which is now beginning to backpedal on.
Now, very quickly before we let you go, Professor, are there any precedents in international law where similar cases have had a significant impact on diplomatic relations between countries such as these, and how has it been addressed?
Well, before now, the United Nations, the Genocide Convention, there have been, I think this is actually the fourth case. The last one before this one was the Myanmar one that the Gambia took the state of Myanmar to the ICJ to deliberate on, to seek similar measures as South Africa has sought. And they did get that reprieve, which helped to reduce the violence of the Myanmar state against the Rohingya people in that country. So it may not be as effective as one would expect, because remember that the ICJ and the UN nation, the United Nations as a whole, does not have enforcement power. However, it is a basis for a pause, a temporary pause, and basis for a political solution to resolving any conflict, as we are seeking to achieve in this particular one. Historically, these kinds of pauses have only helped to reduce the conflict and lay the foundation for resolving them, essentially.
Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, Professor Christopher Isike, appreciate your time.